Thanks, Rosemary. Thanks, Minister. Fantastic to have you on board, and obviously you're very well familiar with design and how important that is to the Irish economy. And just to let everyone know that that is the theme of our talk series this morning, design, how design can impact on society, how it can impact on products, and how we can use that to improve the way that we work in a circular way. I'm joined by Gwen Cunningham, who's the lead in sustainability and circular at NCAD. My colleague Mary Jo Hoyne, who is the new head of craft and education at the Design and Crafts Council, and Edel from our board, who is going to be representing makers. So should be a very exciting series of talks, so hope you enjoy them. I have to go and get mic'd up, but I'll invite everyone else to the stage. Thank you.
Which waters am I in? Oh, this one?
While Tom is getting mic'd up, we might just get the panel to introduce.
Sure.
So Maria might take over and introduce.
Thanks, Rosemary. So good morning, everybody, and thank you to Minister Richmond. I'd like to welcome everybody here to the audience of the talk stage for this really exciting talk around circular economy and the future of circularity. I'd also like to welcome our GANS members here today, so I know there's quite a few of them in the audience, and I look forward to meeting you later on. So to get started, while Tom is just getting his headset sorted, I'd like to introduce Mary Jo Hoyne. So Mary Jo is our new head of craft and education at DCCI. Next to Mary Jo, I've got Edel MacBride, and Edel MacBride is the COO and design director at Edel MacBride Knitwear, so I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Edel and her products. And then we have Gwen Cunningham, and Gwen is a lead for circularity at the NCAD. So I'd like to very much welcome everybody on stage. And Tom as well. So Tom is our head of design, so you've heard a few words from Tom. So I guess really to get us started, I might put the first question to Mary Jo. It's really around, I suppose, the circular economy and the opportunity that it provides for craft and design makers, and how this is supported by our government.
Yes, so thank you, Maria, and thank you to everybody for coming along to listen to this talk. When I was asked to speak, I thought very deeply about what we would say here this morning, and then I decided to go off script and to actually go around and speak to all the craft makers. So I got in extra early this morning to do that. And had some very interesting conversations from the smaller makers right through to the biggest makers here in Ireland. Many of them shared similarities in what they said about what they would see to be opportunities for their particular businesses. And it was interesting at, I suppose, at the macro level to hear perhaps how we have reduced in this country the levels of production around indigenous products, and to see and hear how makers actually feel about that, and how perhaps they would like to engage more with production methods that would bring back more of the indigenous products into this country. So a really good example would be the Sally Gardens, so our basket makers who would grow their willow, for example, is a really self-sustaining model that we see, and it also addresses a craft that could be at risk of becoming endangered. So I think we need to really look at the source. So if we take it from the point of provenance, right through to how it's manufactured, all through those stages to the point of sale. So there's a whole chain of events and sequences that we need to look at, and how we can actually do better within that. It's about making the most of what we've got. You know, as a nation, it's spectacular what's on offer here today, what we can see here today. The level of creativity is unrivaled in the world. It's probably one of the most unique international expos that I've ever seen in the world, having been away from Ireland for the last 30 years. So I'm really, really incredibly proud to be the new head of craft and education. So it's important also to speak about education as a catalyst to actually engage with that chain that I've spoken about. So whether we like it or not, I think it is true to say that we do live in a disposable economy and an environment where, you know, we maybe buy today and we throw away. So I suppose it's about pausing on that particular activity that we've become so accustomed to, and actually going back and revisiting our roots and how we can do that better. We're not going to change the world overnight to go from an industrialized economy back into something that's totally indigenous and that relies totally on small-scale production. So I say today, the opportunity is to get the balance between, you know, the small-scale production and then moving up and scaling businesses and, you know, looking at international export and so forth. So we have to find a sort of happy balance with that. And we have to take the best of our goods and move that forward.
Absolutely, and I think that the Sally Garden is really an excellent example, I suppose, of willow being grown, you know, in Ireland, the craftsmanship of actually farming it and then the craftsmanship of turning it into a product that's sustainable. I think it's fantastic. And I suppose, Tom, I'm interested to hear, you know, from a design perspective, obviously, you know, sustainability and the circular economy, it's really a buzzword. But I guess some people have got experience in doing it well and then others maybe less so. So from your side, who are you seeing that's doing it particularly well in Ireland?
I think I've seen a lot of really good examples of makers and designers here that are creating great products. But I think having spoken to so many people who have stands here, the one common thread seems to be that when you're trying to design something sustainably, the biggest challenge is to find those indigenous raw materials. And it can be a real challenge. But what I think is very important is that people have that as an ambition, as a higher goal, and that they don't let that stop them actually starting with their idea and with their concept and with their business, because the beginning is the most important part of the work, as they say. And I think you can tell that there is absolutely an ambition for everybody to move to a point where they can source materials in Ireland. And I think that is pretty much a kind of a circular thing in itself, in that there will be producers who will get queries from people asking if they can produce something here in Ireland, and maybe they get 3, 4, 5 calls that they say, no, we don't, because it doesn't make business sense. But by the time they get 10 or 20 calls from people saying, can you do it? Then in their mind, they start to go, actually, maybe there is something there. And they start to have those conversations about how we can actually move to a point where we bring that back. And I think that, for me, from having spoken to so many people, is the common thread, and the most important thing is don't let, you know, the materials not being available in Ireland immediately put you off. The most important thing is that we have the ambition to make it happen in a few years' time.
And I suppose, Tom, as well, these materials, you know, they are precious materials. And the one thing that, you know, manufacturers hate, and anybody here that's a maker hates to see, is waste of any side. So we don't want to see anything coming off the production line. We want to be as efficient as possible. And I suppose it's, you know, what work has been done, or what has been done in that space to help businesses, whether they're very established businesses or whether they're startup businesses, to actually improve that waste and to almost build it in from the start. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and Gwen, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on that.
Yeah, you touch on a great point, because I mean, I think the term circular for a lot of people is a very abstract term. So what does it actually mean? You pointed to one, I would call it like one circular strategy, which is looking at your materials, making sure that you're using, you know, recycled, renewable, regenerative, non-toxic, safe materials for as much as possible. Then the second is minimizing waste. That can happen, you know, through for instance, the production process that you have, but also thinking beyond kind of the point of sale and how you're going to ensure that that product does have a second life, a third life, a fourth life at eventual end of use. Then we have designing for durability, which I think we can be really proud in Ireland that so much of the products that I see here today are built for a long life, designed to last. And then there's also a really crucial one and kind of evolving strategy, which is designing for cyclability. So we have to face up to the fact that the reality is at some point in time, your product will have its end of use, its end of life. And at the moment, so many of the products that we produce and put on the market have no possibility to be recycled at end of life because of the way materials have been combined, because of the contaminants, many, many different things. So how do you actually preemptively design a product for that eventual moment of recycling? So these would be, for me, the kind of 4 key circular design strategies that we have at our disposal to work with.
Okay. And I suppose there's, in terms of this reuse, recycling, all that side of things, where do you see, or who do you see as being a leader in terms of Irish manufacturing that's doing this particularly well?
Well, we had the joy in the last year to work together, NCAD and DCCI, to develop something called Circular by Design, which was a training program for professionals and for companies in the Irish context to really build up their kind of capacity on this topic, but also work with them to redesign certain products within their portfolio according to circular principles. And there's many of them here today. The Linen Shirt Company, for instance, FIA, we had Lily May, we had Cadogan. I mean, we had 11 companies in total. And what was really interesting was each of those companies really adopted circular principles in a way that made sense for them.
Yes.
I really love your point that it's a journey. You're not going to go from A to Z, overnight. And it's about really looking at your brand, your context, your product, and saying, okay, what circular design strategy is most relevant for me? And I think that would be the starting point that I'd recommend to anyone in the audience today.
And Gwen, I suppose, because it's interesting for everybody if they haven't started in the journey, or perhaps if they have, to be able to learn. I mean, is there a way that they can see these case studies? We'll be sharing the information, all that piece.
That's a great plug. Yes, we did develop something called the Circular by Design Toolbox, which is online. And this has all the case studies from all the companies that went through the process with us, but also definitions of what is circular design, how can you practically apply it. And I think most importantly, the ambition is that we continue to roll out the program to new cohorts every year.
Absolutely.
So we will be accepting a new bunch of brands this year as well.
And across different categories and different sectors as well.
Well, for now it is textiles focused, but the vision, I suppose, is that eventually we start to move to other sectors, because the same principles apply.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
One of the most impressive projects I saw personally was in the furniture area, and it was a project that Farrell Furniture worked on with the OPW and ATU around the Cork chair that the OPW commissioned in the 70s. And the OPW have thousands of these chairs. And we all recognize them because they're in every Garda station and every office that the OPW are responsible for. And the question that the OPW were faced with was the chairs were actually becoming old, and they were getting tired, and what were they going to do? Throw them out, or attempt to rejuvenate them? So they went to ATU and Farrell Furniture, and they reverse engineered the chair, because it was actually developed in the 70s and there was no working drawings. But it turned out that in all this work, it was discovered that the chair was actually originally designed by a man called Arthur Edwards, who was from G-Plan. And Chorus Troctala had the foresight to bring him over to work with Hoggs and Navan to design furniture. And it's actually an iconic Irish design. So then when ATU reverse engineered it, they now have working plans and they can renovate all of those chairs. So that's another example. You've got textiles, then you've got furniture, and then you think about applying that to all the other different areas of government and big organizations, and it's just simple kind of a shift in thinking.
Absolutely, and I suppose when we're talking about the government, obviously the Minister was here earlier on, I suppose sometimes there's challenges within what government can do and there's challenges within legislation. We've seen that recently, from the farmers, I suppose, challenging the costs of complying with legislation. And I suppose what's your take on government thinking in relation to that?
I think I'm amazed at how actually open government are to hearing about ways to improve the way that we do things and that they are fully behind it. But we really, like everything, we need to come up with, practical examples like Farrell Furniture and the OPW. Yeah. I mean, the OPW, it's changed the mindset in the OPW that they're now looking at lots of other products and areas that they have, and how can they reuse what they have and stop buying things in new all the time. And I think that for me is the way forward, is to come up with practical examples, and one practical example will inspire government.
Absolutely.
In other
I
departments.
think, Thomas, it's really true what he's saying. It's down to us as a craft community to develop those case studies, to actually put them forward to government to say, look, this is what can be achieved. This is a working model for whatever particular craft that we're speaking about. And I think tomorrow, we're having the launch of the Design and Craft Academy, and that's a really opportune moment in which to actually formulate these case studies. So I'd be very interested to continue speaking with the makers and looking at those opportunities where we can actually bring those forward. And I'm sure, as Tom says, government are very sympathetic and they will be very supportive of those studies moving forward. So I think, we have to bring our ideas forward, we have to formulate them, and we have to almost transpose our craft processes and systems onto a circular economy map, as it were, so that we move out of the linear processes that we're all unfortunately within at this moment in time, and we start, like I said earlier, having those small wins and gains to actually move slowly and start to steer us towards something that's way more sustainable and actually sits really well in the community. And I picked up that with earlier conversations with some of the makers about the power of community. And it's those actual case studies that can sit within a community context that then can grow and grow and grow, become national, and then go on to become international. So I think, we have a real role in contributing to that.
Absolutely. And I think if anybody's around tomorrow, that we will be launching the Design and Craft Ireland Academy, which is going to be a fantastic, I suppose, support to the industry. And while it'll be focusing very much around the craft and the skills, we'll also be focusing very much around the business side of it and having bench to business courses. And I suppose even within the sustainability and the circular economy side of it, competitiveness and how we remain competitive is going to be incredibly important.
That's a really good point, Maria, because I think many of our makers, we have our craft within a naturally occurring environment, and we haven't actually sort of stepped back out of, perhaps, especially with the smaller makers, the day-to-day operations, and actually looked at them and said, actually, there's something here that needs to be harnessed, it needs to be distilled, for want of a better word, and it needs to actually be then carried forward, and it will actually can be included into a business process. So all of these things that we're doing, in relation then to the circular economy, is about stepping back, it's about reassessing, it's about analysing, and it's about looking at how we can take it forward. So in fact, you're creating a business model alongside addressing aspects within the circular economy. So you're doing, you have a duality of purpose with that.
Absolutely. And Edel, the next question I think is for you. Obviously, you're a knitwear designer, you're a knitwear maker, you work with wool, a really natural, fantastic product. And I suppose we're seeing, across all industries, the advancements of the digital age, the advancement of the digital economy. And where do you see, or how do you see these working together, particularly in your business, and where do you see it going to in the future?
Well, I suppose, firstly, this is a very interesting circular journey for me, because my first show was 1991 here. And I'm very close to where our stand was then, 2 by 2 square meters near the front door. Mm-hmm. And we made a ridiculous error of judgment. We were very busy making wall hangings the night before here in Dublin, and we read that the show opening was 1 o'clock in the day. And that was actually the time that the president was here to open Showcase. So we came in a tizzy at about 12:30, and the place alight with people. And as we opened our case of 18 samples, American voices were dragging things out, going, how much is this? And we had the most incredible experience, but the guys beside us, our neighbors, were like, what happened to you? What happened to you? And they were ceramic makers. And my young apprentice at the time, who later became my sister-in-law and mother of my 5 wonderful nieces and nephews, Yvonne, our chairs, our table that we had ordered were missing. The organizers said, well, they were delivered yesterday, so they were stolen. And I said to her, go get us more. She went up in the balcony, and I'll not say what probably happened there, but to the neighbours next door who were kind of annoying us with the questions about why were we had the cheek to arrive so late. Yvonne said, we had a car accident in Monaghan.
Yeah.
So these guys I ended up ordering ceramics from that I still use today. So what I see about craft and what I'm so proud of is being involved in something where it has a natural longevity. And it isn't born from waste and it doesn't go to waste. And then where it goes maybe wrong is when it becomes very, very successful and processes, and you use the word linear, and time and money and all of these things come into play. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, that was about the fastest route to reflect on the bottom line. And now I think it's just a wonderful time. Inquiry is the beginning of knowledge, and we have an inquiring consumer. We have young inquiring generations who over 60% are buying secondhand or going to Depop to source something before they go to a new retail situation. And in terms of, you mentioned digital, there is just so many ways it can help with all of that. Well, firstly, like some of the world's luxury brands are now embedding into their sites the process where when you're buying something, it can give you the option of what the resale price is if you decide to sell it tomorrow or in 2 years' time. So you can buy your £1,000 handbag, if that's where you're shopping, with an assurance that in 3 months you can put it back in for £600. And Net-a-Porter is doing that, and they're doing that because the software has arrived. They try to do resell themselves, and it just gets way too messy. But now the tech and software is there that they can partner. Louisa Villaroma, a high-end retailer, very strong online out of Florence, is now offering to resell. Send us pictures of your clothing, and we'll resell that.
And I think we saw that yesterday. We had the Showcase Ireland Awards, and the winner of the Sustainability Award was Copperfish Lighting, and their product is incredibly sustainable. So the base of it is made from wood that's been salvaged from the Guinness buildings and the Liberties. They've got a lifetime guarantee in the lamp, and they're also offering the service to repair the lamp if there's any damages. So there's kind of, I suppose, wraparound services or wraparound value that can be done.
I'm very proud that we have always offered a repair service. Now, even at my stand yesterday, C74, come down and say hello, about 4 people referred to pieces they had that are maybe up to 30 years old. And I certainly didn't start at 23, 24 years old saying, please buy this, it's going to last you 30 years. It was not a consideration. What was a consideration was to make something different in the best way we possibly could. Now, whether materials are a natural instinct, I seem to be able to walk into Hickey's as first-year fashion student in Limerick and find the most expensive wool twill, in the shop to just do a project that could have been done in a, end of line lining. So whether materials are an instinct, you're not going to convert the whole world or train them, but education from this high is where the change is, because what's really depressed or frustrated me is on an odd occasion I might go to a school, someone asks, and you're there with these. One case really stays in mind because there were as many boys wanting to do like a crochet as girls, and I put out all these things, and they don't know where wool comes from. And you say, have any of you got sheep? And 10 wee kids will put their hands up, boys and girls. But they don't make the connection because we're still calling acrylic wool in this country.
I know. And I think what we're seeing as well, certainly there's the rise of the conscious consumer, and I think we're seeing that across all different sectors. And certainly even when you look around and you start seeing the different products, we've got quite a few products and businesses that are very committed to heirloom products. So it's products that, companies or consumers will spend a lot in up front, but the anticipation is it's something that they will pass on to the next generation potentially, or certainly have it for their lifetime. And I suppose, Tom and Gwen, in terms of kind of the trends that you're seeing in that space, do you have any comments on that side of things?
Yeah. I'm seeing some incredible things going on around. My own personal favorite is reinterpretations of classics. So actually, the older, the cooler.
Yeah.
Like, so if you've got a 60-year-old Barber jacket, wax jacket, and that's being renovated by Barber, that's an amazing product.
I suppose
that's
the beauty
actually
of that, Tom, from a manufacturer's point of view or a producer's point of view, is that it creates loyalty. It brings the customer back. You have them for much longer, and it builds a stronger, I suppose, connection with them. It's not a transactional; it's a relationship.
Well, I don't know if anybody saw the coat that Prince Charles wears for his hedge laying. But it's insane. It's like the oldest coat you've ever seen, patched in about 200 patches on it because it's been ripped to shreds from the hedges. But it's a heritage piece because it's his, and it's got that history and it's got that legacy. And I think Barber wax jackets are kind of the same. That if it's something your father wore, or it becomes an heirloom piece then.
And I suppose from a design perspective, the way it was designed initially has lasted.
It's a classic.
The time, and I suppose then the materials as well, if they last for so long, but to have the repair
the
purpose.
materials one is very interesting as well, and the one that I really cannot believe is there's a Dutch startup called the Human Materials Loop. And I came across them because one of their employees is embarking on a journey up a mountain in Argentina, I think, a very high mountain. But they've developed a textile which is similar to Gore-Tex, but it's made from human hair. Before everyone goes, ew, just think for a moment about the amount of human hair that is dropping onto floors all around hairdressers and barbers right now, this very moment. And that's all going into waste.
And it's certainly circular, I suppose. There just might be an element of marketing that would need to position that one top, but very interesting study there. And I suppose as well, kind of walking around yesterday, and every time we come to showcase, there's a huge number of startup companies. And I think if you haven't had a chance to go around and just take a look at them, and particularly in the local enterprise hall, there's a fantastic breadth and spread of businesses there. And actually the winner of our awards yesterday, Tom King, he's a wonderful ironworker and a great character, so definitely worth going to see him. But a lot of the businesses there, because they're coming through the local enterprise office network, they're obviously startup businesses. And I suppose from a startup, when you're starting up your own business, you've got so much to think about. You're probably coming into it having a really good ability to knit or to create or to turn wood, and maybe you haven't thought about things like the circular economy or how you manage or minimize waste. And I suppose, Mary Jo, from your side, what's your thoughts on that in terms of how startup businesses can from the very get-go be embedding circularity into their businesses?
I think that's a really, really important point. It's very good and it's very valid. I think there's a huge piece of work to be done at the beginning of a startup. It's all time consuming, it takes all your resource, all your energy. You may not have the staff on board with you at that particular time, but I couldn't overemphasize enough the need for you as a startup craftsperson who are so passionate about your product, about how it's made and how it's created, that you actually capture that value. Okay, so there's real value in that startup. So all artisans are very, very close to their raw materials. So what is actually happening with the raw material at that particular stage in the startup will actually inform the rest of the journey and all of the things that you're going to do thereafter. But I think many people in the sort of, their passion and their haste to actually move on, that they're not taking enough of a considered approach at the very, very beginning. So it's like, they go through the business planning, they go through the feasibility, the business planning, and then they go to launch with the product. But perhaps there is some mileage in actually concentrating on those raw products, where they came from, how they were grown, how they were sourced. And if it's not possible to have them grown or sourced here in Ireland, what is the relationship with the country that's where you're bringing it in from? So I would take a very much a grassroots approach to all of that, and I would spend time, because I think there's real value in it. It's not simply a matter of later you're coming and you're adding on that provenance element. It happens at the very beginning, and then thereafter on the whole journey that you go with the startup. So I suppose giving it time, giving it consideration, actually stepping back and saying, this is how I want to be seen working with my particular product and that raw material. So, I was speaking with Edel earlier, and I was speaking with some of the bigger providers, and they were saying, well, we have to go abroad, we have to source product elsewhere. So really at those incubation stages, deciding, am I working with an indigenous product, or am I going to have to take a product from abroad? So it's almost like it's a values piece, but it will determine the course of your business thereafter. So I think it's time well spent at the beginning.
Absolutely, and I suppose one of the most important areas, particularly for buyers and for consumers, and obviously for producers as well, is how do you prove your credentials? So how do you prove your sustainability, and how can you accredit, I suppose, if there needs to be it, around sustainability? And I know it's not the easiest thing to do for across the supply chain, but Gwen or Tom, are you seeing anything in that space that's striking you that's going to make it easier for businesses, I wonder, to do that?
I don't know about easier, but needed. I mean, there's a huge amount of regulation coming down the line, and very soon we will see, if I talk about textiles, we saw the launch of the EU textile strategy in March of last year, which sets out a really clear vision for our industry and says that by 2030, all products in the EU market need to be long-lived and recyclable, made as much as possible from recycled fibres, free of hazardous chemicals and substances, and built with respect to social rights.
Which is going to have a huge impact on businesses. And I suppose it's almost, this thinking needs to have started 10 years ago, but it needs to absolutely have started today, in terms of what that's going to mean and the impact that it's going to have for businesses in Ireland. So I guess it's one that we will be focusing on and trying to support and working with the government on to see how best that's going to play out.
I think government play a really crucial role in kind of helping companies to make that transition. On one hand, to really, pinpoint and eliminate any financial or legal or even cultural barriers that companies experience in making the shift. And I think DCCI you're in such a wonderful position as a convening organisation to really kind of play the go-between between the makers, the designers in Ireland and government, and say these are the barriers to entry, and this is what government needs to tackle. So to give you a really concrete example, I work a lot in the Netherlands, and they have a huge denim industry there, many denim brands based in Amsterdam specifically, and a lot of their suppliers are in Turkey. And they're looking down the line and they're seeing that there's going to be this regulation that demands the integration of recycled content into denim. But at the same time, they know that actually there's a law in place that inhibits the export of used textile waste from the Netherlands to Turkey. You can't take a used garment and bring it from the Netherlands to Turkey right now, which means that the recyclers in Turkey can't access that feedstock. So the government stepped in and they said, well, we won't meet our targets if we don't address this barrier. And they changed the law to allow for that closed loop kind of alliance and partnership between Turkey and the Netherlands to take fruition. So like there's many we have circular intent in a linear world. I often think, and I think the government together with business needs to start to create the enabling conditions for the change. And that can also be, really strategic innovation funds to make sure that, for instance, the infrastructure is here on a national level to enable all of our good design intent to come to fruition. So, if I'm a maker and I'm building something which is 100% recyclable, at the moment, 65% of all textiles, for instance, goes directly to landfill or incineration. It's not being collected. So all my good design intent is wasted because the system isn't there to collect it, to bring it back into use. And then lastly, I think you pointed to it, with the great furniture example, government need to be also and can be the first customer and really represent demand for these products in their procurement.
And take a lead on that.
And that's going to also drive big change.
Okay, fantastic. I'd like to open up to the floor. I don't know if anybody has got any questions. I think Roisin's got a microphone there if anybody would like to ask any of our panel some questions around circular economy.
The company Gani, by 2024, have committed to taking leather, which they see as the processing of leather is hugely problematic. And they've replaced it, working with an American company, a science company, they've replaced it with a product made from mushrooms.
Okay.
So I personally like to have maybe some companies that are an example of what I see as good practice and that are interesting to look at and see what they're doing, because there's just so much information out there. And so much of it is greenwashing or whatever you call it. So the tags on everything now, if you go into town, all the tags will say things, organic cotton, whatever. And organic cotton, doesn't mean anything unless we're looking at the actual farming. And what's really exciting in Ireland, I brought up these two wools, is the Galway Wool Project has been one of the most exciting. This actually isn't Galway wool. I have Galway wool at home, Galway sheep wool, which is the closest to an indigenous breed of sheep that we have. And the Galway Co-op, a lady called Blanid Gallagher, really was inspired to do something that was fully Irish. And I'll be honest and say I thought it was impossible a number of years ago, because you're just constantly told our fleece is not suitable, it's too coarse, and so there's always a lot of spin around what the status quo is. But these two yarns, this one is 60% Irish grown wool, 40% New Zealand. I don't have a problem with a marriage with New Zealand or Norwegian or wool, where you've got to be realistic and say, from this, I can really support some Irish farming, but I can also get a great quality of
Wool
product.
Yep.
We're moving there. It's not about being some absolute purist and being closed down in 3 months. On the other side, spun in the same place, an hour's drive from me, this one is 100% merino, which at the minute is all the fleece base, all comes in, and the entire processing is done in Donegal. Now, in 2011, which was the year of craft, and Mary McAlee, she sponsored and did a lovely event, and that show here was an interesting show because it was a very, very down time. Think on 2011 and the crisis and everything gone. So the year of craft was somewhat uplifting. A buyer from Japan came to my stand with an interpreter. He loved a coat. I could make out some of the words. You know, she said he wants to know what the wool is it Irish made? And I said, it's hand knitted, it's merino wool, yes, it's Irish. And I could pick out from his body language and what he was saying, no merino in Ireland. And I didn't feel like a liar. I bought the yarn in Kilcar, I knit the coat, and I thought, what is going on here? And I thought, my gosh, he's talking about the fleece. And I thought, we are really in trouble in this country. If the buyer is coming in here. So it was like this eye-opener that people don't come to Ireland to buy mass-produced goods. They don't come into Ireland to buy goods that have been, you know, flowing in their finished state all across. They come here for something, you know.
And it is the experience,
top,
it is the heritage of it.
Beautiful,
absolutely.
and a connection to Ireland. And I think now with the show last year and this year we've seen, I think we've, you know, caught it in time. But I had left the show for a number of years because I just felt we've lost it, the buyer I want, you know, so
That's it.
I'll leave it with you.
Fantastic. We've got one question in the audience.
Hi, I'm Annika Berglund, and I am a member of Felt Makers Ireland.
Hi, Anka.
And I want to chime in on the wool issue because we've found that over 95% of the wool used by felt makers in Ireland consists of imported merino.
Yeah.
So a year and a half ago, we started a project where we tried to source as many different breeds of sheep reared in Ireland, not all native sheep, to test for felting so we could tell our members what the alternatives were, because many didn't know how to source the wool or how it would work for them. We're nearly ready. We're going to publish a book soon. Great. But by far the biggest problem we had was farmers are dying to give you wool. Most of them will give it away. Otherwise, they're forced to bury it because it costs about 10 times more to shear a sheep than you can sell the wool for. And the problem is washing and carding. There is nowhere you can, as a small-scale farmer, take a fleece, get it washed, possibly carded, and returned to you. And that is still a problem. There's some movement, some co-ops, but if we want to use Irish wool, there's infrastructure missing.
Absolutely, and I think that's absolutely acknowledged. I spoke to Donegal Yarns. I was up at the Donegal Creative Coasts panel talk, I think it was in November time in Derry, and even speaking to Donegal Yarns, and it is, I suppose, around bringing in the methodology so that you've got that quality. So we've got the Irish wool, but the breeds that we have don't all suit the wool that we might particularly need. But certainly there's some great businesses that are starting. So I'm sure you know Heirloom blankets by Lionel Mackey and his partner, whose name escapes me. But he's working within that space to try and bring in more of the Irish breeds, but to create a product that's an heirloom quality product. So it's baby blankets to start off with and adult blankets. So I think there's certainly momentum within that space. There's an appetite. And I think to Tom's point earlier, where there's one person doing it, there's 5 people doing it, there's 10 people doing it. It's to get that collective and get that momentum together. And I suppose that's where, DCCI, we can come in and support that.
Absolutely. I think, and like Maria said and Tom said earlier, it is about supply and demand. It's about the demand of the people here in Ireland, but also our international customers, and just what Edel has been saying there about the wool and how indigenous is that wool. It's about uniting that voice across the country and actually saying, well, look, here we are now, we have a case. And it's about putting that forward to government, and it is basically it's a lobby, and that's where I would see that we have a whole piece around the educational piece that can support with that, which will be coming up in the launch of the new DCCA Academy. So I'd be very interested, as I said previously, to speak to people and afterwards and to look at how we can develop case studies and move them forward. I think we have a project of innovation immediately. We have a circular economy project. We have projects that actually cut across many different strategic government agendas, and we have the ability to actually fulfill them and to meet those targets. So I think it's about drawing out here today everything that has been said and actually moving that agenda forward.
The jewel in the crown would be to get our carding in Ireland. A fleece goes to UK mainland and comes back. It's tagged and baled, and we can bring it back with its farm name, but it has to go offshore. And the investment to bring the carding to Ireland is going to be massive. Get on to government. If we could do that, we really are going places. And thank you for bringing that.
I think there's no reason why we're going offshore for that to happen when that function can actually happen here in Ireland. And I'm speaking to other makers who are having to, take that function to Portugal or Spain or Italy or wherever, because they've actually told me it's not available here in Ireland. So, that's job generation as well. So we're actually addressing employment. Like I said, it's extremely cross-cutting across multiple agendas. So I would be really interested in moving that forward.
Fantastic. I don't know if there are any other questions from the audience. Okay. Well, I'd just like to very much thank our panel of speakers. So Mary Jo, Edel, Tom and Gwen, thank you so much for sharing that. And what Gwen was speaking about earlier, the website for the case studies, Gwen.
Yes, the Circular by Design Toolbox.
So Circular by Design Toolbox. You'll find some really good starter information there if you're not familiar with it.
And also on the designweekireland.ie, there's the talk from the Circular by Design event that we had in Smock Alley, which is, for anyone who's involved in fashion, is an absolute must-see, because there is some incredible talks and incredible innovations spoken about there.
And
just to add to that as well.
The Futurist, the podcast I like, because if you don't have time to maybe right now go and do a course or something, a girl called Jo Lenihan, has a podcast, Futurist, and she talks about circular in different disciplines, including textiles.
Fantastic. And just to add to Tom's as well, I think if anybody hasn't seen the Bruce Mao talk that was done during our Design Week, it's absolutely fantastic. He talks about there's no waste in nature, and I think he sort of leads on to production and different things like that. Absolutely fantastic, really thought-provoking. And I suspect that the circular economy and all that brings and all that means for us is just going to be more and more important. So I guess the more information and the more informed we can be, the better for everybody. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate having such a great audience, and thank you to the panel speakers again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.